Welcome back to part 2 of this short module where we look at how to use the WTP plugins. In this session, we will set up hot deployments for the first time. This will mean that we can make changes to the JSPs and the code without needing to stop and start the server each time. Then we'll take an existing non-dynamic project and we'll change it to recognize the plugins and the server integrations. So if you've been on our Java web development course or the spring-mvc course, then you'll be able to upgrade your existing projects to use WTP. One of the main things to get right on a project is how to manage changes. At the moment, if I make a change to my JSP page, let's say we change this title here to the first 10 squares are, and I save that change and then switch across to the browser and refresh the page. As you can see, absolutely nothing is happening to the title here. And the story will be the same with the servlet as well. If I go back to our Hello World servlet, we're getting the string hello everyone as we set up before. And I'll go into Eclipse and let's say I'm going to change that hello everyone to hello world. Again, I'll save my change, switch across to the browser and refresh. And again, the change hasn't been picked up, even though the date and time is refreshing when I press refresh. Now, this isn't a big deal at first. We can just go into Eclipse and we can stop the server by hitting the red terminate button here. And then we can restart the server by hitting the start the server button. And as you can see, that just took a few seconds. I think as well on the servers tab, if I right click there, I can always use the restart option and there is a Control, Alt and R key combination. And if I go back to my browser now, I'll refresh this servlet. I'm expecting the everyone to change to world. That's good. And I'll go back to my JSP page and refresh, and the first 10 squares are. So restarting the server is okay when you're on a tiny project like this. It started pretty quickly. It was, I think, probably under a second and was probably more elegant than the redeploying we used to do on the original training courses. But before long, you'll find that the startup times get longer and you'll find that making changes becomes really frustrating. In these days of agile development, it's really desirable if we can make a quick change and then immediately switch to the browser and see what effect that change has. So this is where hot deploying your changes can help. With hot deploy, what we expect is that as soon as we compile our change or save a JSP page, we can immediately go to the browser and see our changes. Now, we do need to make some changes to our setup to make hot deploying happen. Now, I must admit that off camera, for the last few hours, in fact, I've been working quite hard to try to find the correct settings to make hot deployment work. I get a feeling that it can be a bit of a dark art getting hot deploying to work. In fact, thinking back, many of the projects that I've worked with have been happy to manually stop and start the server constantly, simply because getting hot deploying to work can be something of a pain. The first thing that I've noticed is that for some reason the Tomcat 6 that we've been working with on the course so far, I simply could not get to work with hot deploying. Now, at first I thought that was because on the Tomcat 6 that I supplied with the course, I did make a few changes to one of the config files under the hood to prevent jar files getting locked. Now, I have been told that that would prevent hot deploying from working. But even when I took that config change out, I still could not get hot deploying to work at all. So what I'm going to do with you over the next 5 or 10 minutes is I'm going to download Tomcat 7 and get that working with the WebTools platform, and I'll show you that it's actually quite a simple process from there to get hot deploying working. And you can find all of the Tomcat downloads at the tomcat.apache.org website. Following here the link to download Tomcat 7, and I'm not sure which platform you're on, but in fact you can always just take the zip file here from the core distribution. It's only about 7.5 megabytes in size, so that shouldn't take too long to download. All you have to do then is unzip the contents of that download to any directory on your hard drive. We'll go back into Eclipse and to our WebTools project. I'm going to do all the work on the Servers tab right here. Just to keep things simple, I've already stopped the server. I'm going to right click on that server and select Delete, and then click on OK. So we have a nice clean sheet to work with. And now we'll right click on the servers view and select New Server. Now this can be a little bit fiddly. Clearly we have to select Tomcat 7 from the list. Then we'll go to Next. And now because Tomcat 7 is new to Eclipse, it's asking us for the installation directory. So if you click on Browse and then find the directory in which you unzipped Tomcat. Now I just did that off camera because the unzipping process was a bit boring, but just find the folder where you've unzipped Tomcat. The contents of that folder should be the bin, conf, lib and logs and so on. Then we can go to Next. And now a really important step is that remember this workspace can have more than one project inside it. And Eclipse needs to know which of the projects are going to be under the control of Tomcat 7. Well, we only have one project, but we need to select it and click on Add. And now it's in the list of configured projects. We can now click Finish. And just to make sure that that's working, I'm going to start up the server by clicking on it and pressing Start. And now we'll go back to our web pages and I'll refresh our first 10 square numbers. And that's rendering okay. And our Hello World servlet is still rendering just fine. Okay, so that's got the server working under Tomcat 7. But there are a few really important configuration changes that we need to make if hot deploy is going to work. First of all, I'm going to stop the server so I can make a few configuration changes to the server. And I'll take you through the important steps. On the Servers tab, double click on your Tomcat 7 server. This pulls up this rather complicated looking configuration page. I'm going to maximize that page, and the key changes to make are under the Publishing tab. If you drop that down, you need to make sure that you're set to automatically publish when resources change. The other important setting to change, I'm moving off to the left down on the Server Options tab. I'm going to click on Serve Modules without publishing. So automatically publish when resources change and serve modules without publishing. Then I'm going to click on the Modules tab here towards the bottom. Another important change to make is on your list of web modules, you'll find your project. At the moment, there's a setting called Auto Reload, and it's set to Enabled. Now that might sound like the correct thing to have, but in fact that's going to cause your entire application to load itself when changes have been made. And that's kind of the opposite of hot deploying. We just want the changes to be applied. Otherwise everything will get really slow. So you must remember to click on Edit and then untick Auto Reloading Enabled and click OK. And when I'm on projects, that's often a step I forget to do because I'm very likely to go ahead and create more dynamic web projects in this workspace. And I've got to remember to come back in and always disable auto reloading. So they're the 3 changes I need to make. I'll just save those changes with a Control S. In fact, I think I'm going to review the changes. On the Overview tab, we have automatically publish when resources change, and we have serve modules without publishing. Then on the Modules tab, for every project we have, we need to disable auto reloading. Once we've made those changes, we can start the server again, but another crucial step is if I right click here in the servers area, don't use start. You must start the server as debug. Hot deploying only works when debugging. You can use Control, Alt and D if you prefer. When we start the server under debugging, the steps appear exactly the same as before and the server will start as normal. So I'll switch to my browser and I'm going to start with the JSP page, which currently looks like this. And I'm going to make a change to the JSP page without restarting the server. I think it's time we made this list look a little bit prettier. I'm going to add in an unordered list at the start of each line. Use a list item tag. And I don't know if I've said this already, but just in case you haven't been on my web development training course, I promise you it gets more sophisticated than this. Now I just did a save there and I haven't restarted the server, but notice this is saying synchronized. If I now switch across to my browser and hit refresh, wonderful. The change was picked up automatically, which should be a big boost to my productivity. But JSP pages aren't too difficult to get working with this plugin. In fact, it's making changes to Java, which is a little bit harder. If I pull up my servlet, which is currently looking like this. Hello everyone, the date is blah blah blah. And I'm going to change this for, let's say, hello world with a nice big exclamation mark. And all I'm going to do is save that file, and I'm saving it now. And then across to the browser, notice I haven't started Tomcat. I'm going to hit refresh. And as you can see, that change has now been picked up. Now I must point out that the Java hot deployment is a lot more brittle than the hot deployment of the JSPs. And there are actually some restrictions as to what Java can be hot deployed. For example, if you change the signature of any methods in your Java, then you will need to do a restart. But really, it's the changing of JSPs that I think is the biggest boost to your productivity. So please do feel free to try hot deploying for yourself. I must say it can be a brittle process. I've spent hours just getting this recording session working. But do try it for yourself anyway, and hopefully it will work for you. Okay, so that's how to use the plugin for a brand new project. But I guess that you maybe already have a project that you're working on and you'd like to use it with this plugin. What I'm going to do here is I will open up the project that we created on the spring-mvc course. If you remember, at the start of this recording, I showed you the project from our spring-mvc course. If you followed our Java web development course, then you can use your project from there. The steps will be exactly the same. So I already have the project open in the workspace, and just to make everything clear, I'm going to close these 2 files from our little test project that we've been working on, and I think I'll go as far as to right click on the test project. I'll select close project just so that it doesn't get in the way. So we'll concentrate then on our spring-mvc project. Now remember that this project, at the moment anyway, is a normal Java web project. If I were to right click on the project here, you'll see that under the Run menu, there are no options to run this on the server like we had with our test project. So what I need to do is to convert this project from a normal Java project into a full-blown dynamic web project. And really, there are two ways that I know of doing the conversion. The first approach, and I must say it does sound very clunky, is to create a brand new dynamic web project and then to copy across all of the code from your old normal Java project. You'd copy all of the Java source files into the src directory. You'd have to move all of the jar files into the lib directory. And of course, all of your XML files would need to be copied across as well. Now that might sound clunky, but it does at least work, and it's quite a simple process to do. You'd probably have to be careful that the old project that you copied from, you'd need to archive that project, maybe make it read-only or something like that. So that's one approach, and you might find that people on your project are happy to do that. But there is a more formal approach, and that's called adding a facet to your project. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to take you through the steps of adding facets. Now, before we start, I need to warn you, if you're following along with me, please be careful what you do here, because I found following these steps, if you make one wrong move, it can be very difficult to go back to being a regular Java project again. So the choices you make here are kind of, you've got one and only one chance to make your choices. Let's go through it. First of all, I'm going to stop the server. That was the server that was running from our previous test project. And we need to pull up the project properties menu. Right clicking on the project, go for properties. We're looking here for the tab called Project Facets. And by the way, facets are really just the extra features that you have on these more advanced projects. So, for example, the server integration is a facet of a project. Now, because we're looking at the moment at a basic Java project, it's warning me that the project isn't currently using any facets, and we need to click on, by the look of it, convert to faceted form. So we'll do just that. And now it's giving me a list on the left-hand side of all of the available facets that I can add to this project. Now, you will only see this list if you're using the Java EE version of Eclipse. Effectively, what we're seeing here are all of the facets that are bundled with that particular version of Eclipse. So, for example, if you were working on a project that was using web services, you could go ahead and add the REST web services facet. Now, please, I know I've warned you already, but be very careful here, because if you click any of these, it's possible that you might not be able to unclick them. What we're looking for is the dynamic web module. So I'm going to click with caution, the checkbox there. Well, that looks okay. Now, it is giving me a warning that there's further configuration available here. Let's just have a look at what's in there. Well, it's just giving me a chance to change the context root of the project. Now, I don't know if you remember this from our previous courses, but the context root is the folder that is going to appear on the user's browser. And you can change that to anything you like. I think I'm going to leave that as MVC project, just for now at least. And I can also generate a web.xml file here, but I really don't need to do that because I already have a web.xml file. So we'll click OK, and I think that's all we need to do. And we'll click OK again. Okay, so we're now back into the project. Now I can see a red mark on the project which suggests we have errors. And I'm not surprised really, because remember that our original project had our own conventions. For instance, we had a folder called Web in our project. Now, the plugin isn't going to know that the contents of that folder are the web contents. So I think what we're going to have to do is we are going to have to manually move a few of the files into the right place. So I think I will start here. If we have a look in that web folder, recall that that contains all of our JSPs, our JavaScript files, and there's a couple of images in there as well. And I'm just going to left shift all of those files and then drag them into the web content folder. Now, I didn't even look at what the error was there, but I suspect it was something like we're using headers and footers here that we're including into the JSP files, and the plugin was trying to find those fragment files. It couldn't find them because they weren't in the right place. So effectively our web folder is now redundant, and if you wish you could delete that folder. So I'll get rid of that completely. Now the next problem will be that on this particular training course we worked with a folder called webinf that our ant build was picking up and copying into the correct place in the WAR file. Well, as you know from our exploration on our test project, the plugin already has a webinf folder inside the web content folder. At the moment there's nothing inside there. We need to, on the plugin, copy across all of these XML files from the webinf folder here into the webinf folder that the plugin has created. The webinf that you're seeing here is just a webinf that we created on the course, and our Ant script was picking it up. So the plugin won't know about this folder, and once again it's safer if we delete that folder from the plugin. So just to recap then, inside the web content folder you should have a webinf that contains all of the XML files for things like the Spring framework. And similarly, I'll just close that down for a moment, we have our very important web.xml file, which of course all Java web applications have, and that really does need to be copied across. I'll do it just by dragging it into the webinf folder of web content. And then finally, once again, we have a lib directory, which again the plugin's not going to be able to find, so we need to left shift all of those jar files and we need to get those transferred into the web content webinf lib directory. Great, so some fairly tedious steps there, and I will delete the lib directory now because once again that's redundant. But I think, unless I've forgotten something, we've now got all of our resources put into the correct directories. Now that's confusing Eclipse. I'm getting a little red mark on the project because if I go to my build path and configure build path, you can see now it's saying that all of these build path entries are missing, and that's because this lib directory doesn't exist anymore. So I'm going to go onto the Libraries tab and I shall left shift all of the jar files there and remove them, and then click Add Jars, and because I've moved them to the Projects, Web Content, Webinf, Lib directory, I can now find them all in there. So I'll shift click all of those jar files and then click on OK. So that should mean that my build in Eclipse is now going to work. Notice, by the way, we didn't have to move our Java because I think the plugin was clever enough. When we added the facet, it found all of our Java under src, so it knows about the Java, so I don't have to move that around at all. Now before I can run it on the server, if you have a look on your servers tab and drop down the Tomcat 7 server link there, you'll see that at the moment the only project that the server knows about is our test project that we were working on earlier. we need to add the MVC project to this list. And the easiest way to do that is to double click on the Tomcat 7 link here. And you will remember this configuration page from a short while ago. One of the tabs down at the bottom is the Modules tab. And this is listing all of the projects that we want to deploy and run on the server. Well, we're not using the test project anymore, so I will remove that from the list. And then we'll add a web module, and as you can see there, it's finding the MVC project. It looks like I can change the context root as well. I won't for this recording, but you can if you want. I'll remember that the project is called MVC_projects. Click on OK there. Now, if you remember from our discussion on hot deploying, we really need this auto reload to be set to disabled, because otherwise it will try to reload the whole project every single time we change a file, which would be very, very slow. So I've just clicked on Edit, and now I will untick auto reloading enabled. So I think if we save that, we can close that tab now. I think we're now ready to run the server. Now, as before, I'll run it as a debug, and that's just in case I want to do any kind of hot deploying. Now, I really do need to check this log very carefully to make sure there's no exceptions, and there were exceptions that flashed past, and I'll better maximize this. And it looks like a Spring Framework problem. So this wouldn't affect you if you were using the Java web development course, but for the Spring Framework course, it's a file not found exception, and it's failing to find our application.xml file. That, of course, is the global Spring configuration file. So I'll re-minimize that, and I may as well stop the server because there's no way this is ever going to work. And if we have a look at our config files, if we look inside web content, I'm inside the webinf directory here. The config file for spring-mvc is dispatcherservlet.xml, and I think it's this line here where we're importing the original application.xml file. Now, this file really needs to be inside the webinf folder, otherwise it simply won't be appearing on the server at all. Now, I think our Ant script was dealing with that before. As part of the build, it would have been copying the application.xml from the source directory into the webinf directory. But since we're not running Ant anymore, we will need to copy that file across manually. So I'm going to look inside Java resources. There's the application.xml file, and I think I'm just going to drag it across into the webinf folder. So I hope now that that file is going to be picked up. As I say, if you're working with the Java web development course, you won't have that complication to worry about. So I'll go for the start the server in debug mode again. And I'll check the console. Well, this looks a lot better. It's saying initializing Spring Framework and server startup in, well, that was about 14 seconds. I actually edited a little bit of that away because it was quite a slow startup. But it looks like now I can go across to my browser and visit one of our pages. Well, don't forget that the context root that the plugin has decided upon is MVC_project. And then we just need one of our page names. Well, again, you won't know this if you're not following the Spring MVC course, but on the Spring MVC course, the URLs are all set via the controllers. So if we look inside the book management controller, for instance, one of the interesting pages is the /viewallbooks.do page. I do need the .do on the end. I think I've got one too many forward slashes there. And I'm going to hold my breath. And we have an error here, and the error is that it can't find the bundle for the views. Now, this is going quite deep into the Spring MVC course. If I switch back into Eclipse, that we did have a config file on that course called views.properties. And we used that file to provide a mapping between controllers and the views that we want to display. We also have properties files for the message bundles as well. That's for internationalization. And you will have used those if you were on the Java web development course as well. Now, I've made a slight mistake here in recording the course in that these three files, it turns out, needs to be in the Java area of your project. Otherwise, at runtime, the server can't find these files. So just a few moments ago, when I was dragging these across, I made a mistake there. Really, these three files, all of the ones ending in .properties, need to be transferred across to the Java resources. Now, I don't know if you can see this as I'm dragging across in Eclipse, but when I hover over the src folder, I'm getting a no entry sign, which is actually blocking me from copying the files across. I don't know why that's the case. In fact, if I stop the server, which I probably need to do anyway, and try again, I think the problem will still be there. Now, I don't know why that happens, but really life's too short to sort that problem out. I'm just going to copy the files and then click on the src folder and right click and paste them in. So I've now effectively created a copy of those three files. And I mustn't forget to go back to the original three and to delete them. Another one of those little Eclipse quirks that catches us from time to time, but hopefully you've been able to transfer your properties file to the src folder, because that's certainly where it should live. Let's try again then. We'll get the server up and running under debug. And you might have expected that I could do that via hot deploy, but I think, to be honest, if you're moving config files around your development, you definitely need to stop and start the server. Anyway, the server's up and running, so we'll go straight in there and do a refresh. And that's looking great. We're now getting the full list of books appearing for this bookstore. On the spring-mvc course, we did about 1,000 books on that bookstore, which was definitely overkill, but it certainly served to prove a point. And I should now be able to go ahead and work with the application, such as finding a book by an author. And if I search for all of the books by Charles Dickens, have I spelt that right? I think so. That's looking like the application is working just fine. I think it might also be worth testing hot deploy. If I go back to my all books page, I'm going to switch into Eclipse, and it's from this controller method here that the list of all books is created. And I think just as a test, it's only to test, but I'm going to go straight into the Java. I'm going to take that entire list of books and I'm going to clear the list of books, so that will remove all of the books that have come from the database. And then I'll add into the list of books just a new test book. I think we have to specify the ISBN, title, author and price. So for ISBN, I'll do anything. For the title, let's call it Hot Deploying, and the author is me. And for the price, let's put a massive price on there. Now, all I'm going to do, notice I haven't saved the file just yet, and I promise you I won't edit this piece of video. I won't cut anything out. I'm going to do a save, switch straight across to here, press refresh, and I hope you could see that there was no trickery going on there. That change was picked up almost instantly. So we've managed to convert an existing project into a dynamic web project. We had to be very careful to move all the files into the right places, but it didn't seem to be too difficult. And now we've got the server running using hot deployment. So for this course, that's it for the basics of WTP plugins. I have to admit that I'm not an expert on using these plugins. In fact, on some projects, I will avoid using them. And that's because I find that the plugins can sometimes be quite flaky, and they can be difficult to work with if you do something wrong. And of course, it also does lock me into using a particular development environment. The steps that we followed here will work fine on Eclipse, but it's a different story on IntelliJ and on NetBeans. By the way, both of those IDEs have very good extensions themselves for working with dynamic web projects. So I think often I do like working with a simple Ant script and a simple project over which I have full control. But that's just my opinion. There are many developers who think that WTP is a much better way of working, and their opinion is just as valid. Having said that, I think that any good Java web developer, and I hope that you're one of them, should be happy to work with or without plugins. So I advise you to be open to working with Ant-based projects or dynamic web projects if you're working on a professional Java web project. So certainly, even working with the plugin, you still need to understand what the web.xml file is, how the WAR file is built, what the webinf directory is, and so on. And if I hadn't had good knowledge of what those things were, it would have been very hard for me to convert into a dynamic web project. So I think you should really see the plugins as a little extra help on top of your existing skills. By the way, one last thing that I could do, just mentioning WAR files there, is if we right-click on the project and select Export, you can see there's an option there to export the project as a WAR file. So you would do that as a final step on your project when you want to deploy to a live server or something like that. So that's all I have time for on this short module. Do keep an eye on our website at www.virtualpairprogrammers.com, where over time we'll be adding lots of courses covering different areas of software engineering. At the moment, we're concentrating on Java. We have courses on Spring, Java EE, and web development, but there's a lot more to come. Our courses are many hours long, and they all aim to be as good, if not better, than the courses that you would take when you're in a classroom. So maybe I'll see you on a course soon. Until then, thanks for watching.